Spy Cops Info Podcast, a series on the secret undercover political police who infiltrated over 1,000 campaign groups since 1968. Find us online at spycops.info. Episode 45, Tranche 3 Phase 2 Preview. Welcome to the Spy Cops Info Podcast. My name's Tom Fowler and I'm joined with
Chris Bride from the Undercover Research Group.
We're about to embark on Phase 2 of Tranche 3. We're now into the 2000s, much more so than has been the case with previous previews we've done. We're talking about sometimes people that we know personally, and in some cases, undercover officers who reported on us about time, probably seeing we're a good 11 years into the inquiry process.
It is different, isn't it, now? With this phase of hearings, I don't really remember any of the undercovers from the time. Maybe Jason Bishop vaguely, although I actually wrote my very first profile for Undercover Research Group on Bishop. So my memory of what actually occurred at the time blurred in with me doing research and speaking to a bunch of people who did know him.
I've got a vague memory of seeing Bishop and Wellings.
Do you remember Wellings?
Just the look of him. I don't remember ever speaking to him or anything, but I do have a vague memory of him. Anyway, we've got 5 undercover officers over this next set of hearings. Jim Boyling, cover name Jim Sutton, Jason Bishop, real name unknown, Carlo Saraki, cover name Carlo Neri, Simon Wellings, real name unknown, and Robert Hastings, cover name Rob Harrison. We'll be hearing from quite a few civilians as well, including 5 of the women who were deceived into sexual relationships by these undercover officers, as well as many of the other people that they spied on. We should also say, in terms of the inquiry in general, there have been further developments. There's been some issues around the way in which disclosure has been structured for this tranche. The complaint is going in. It might have already gone in by now. I'll spare listeners the Kafkaesque bureaucratic nightmare that is the inquiry and bothers about it.
Yeah, it may be that we'll get someone else on to talk about the procedural issues. It is really important. I think we're just going to talk about the evidence that's likely to be heard today. It just makes it too long if we go into all the procedural stuff as well.
The hearings resume on Monday the 2nd of February. We start off on the first day hearing from Joseph Batty. Joe Batty was mentioned during the Tranche 3 Phase 1. He's a comrade of Dan Gilman and Frank Smith, who both gave evidence. Though Frank Smith gave evidence in private, so you might have missed what he had to say. He still is a member of the Socialist Party, Committee for Workers International. As I understand it from what was said during the Tranche 3 Phase 1 hearings, he was one of the activists who Carlo Saraki attempted to set up with the firebombing of the charity shop that he said was owned by an Italian fascist. So I expect we'll be hearing a lot more about the events of that particular evening, which has already been covered a fair bit. Then on Tuesday, the 3rd of Feb, we'll be hearing from Monica, and not her real name. And Monica is a pseudonym. She was one of the women who was deceived into a sexual relationship by the undercover officer James Boyling, who she knew as Jim Sutton. She was an activist with Reclaim the Street and had a relationship with him between 96 and 97, but they remained friends for the duration of his deployment.
You can read about Monica's story on the Police Spies Out Alive's website.
Then on the Wednesday, we'll be hearing from 2 activists who were involved with Reclaim the Streets and Camp for Climate Action and Earth First. That's Roger Geffen and GRD, both of whom were spied on by Jim Boyling and probably some other undercover cops as well. I'm familiar with who Roger Geffen is. GRD obviously is not their real name, it's a pseudonym.
Those of a certain age probably know Roger. I remember him most from being in the legal team at Climate Camp. Until the inquiry, I wasn't aware he was around. He was one of the early Reclaim the Streets people as well.
And then on Thursday, we've got Rosa, who was deceived into a long-term relationship by the undercover police officer Jim Boyling. You can read about her on the Police Spies Out of Lives website.
The only thing I want to say is, in general terms, about just how traumatic her story is. And I'm not entirely clear during the hearing what's going to be said publicly and what isn't. So I'm imagining there's going to be some reporting restriction orders involved because of the nature of the story.
What is very much in the public domain. Rosa was one of the 8 women who brought one of the initial legal cases against the Metropolitan Police for deployment of undercover officers. She was in a relationship with a man she knew as Jim Sutton for 9 years. And they lived together. She had children by him. It's an incredibly traumatic story. Certainly, I would say that without her involvement and the detective skills that she deployed, we probably wouldn't be in the position we are now. I think it'll be a very important day of the hearings. I would really recommend anyone who has an interest in the women's stories, because of the complex nature of Rosa's abuse by Jim Boyling. It hasn't been subject to much in the way of a documentary. There's a lot of things involved with it, not least because of the children. So yeah, that is likely to be a very intense day of hearing.
Yeah, and the following week we have Boiling all week from Monday to Thursday.
Yeah, a full for Jim Boiling. As is the case with previous officers, they give them 4 days. It may be that it's finished after 3. So if you are thinking of coming, I'd really recommend making sure you're there on one of the first 3 days. I know in the past people have booked themselves in just for the 4th day and been disappointed in not being able to attend. And then here, it may be though that there's a lot to his deployment. They can easily fill 4 days of questioning.
There are a lot of things to say about Boiling.
Yes.
None of them pleasant.
No.
But one of the odd things is that to date, he's the only officer known to have been subject to police disciplinary and found guilty on, I think, once or twice. This was after he retired from the police. So, in effect, it was meaningless in terms of any sanction.
Yeah.
But it just seems odd. That's one of the oddities, isn't it? It's not so much that he was disciplined. It's just that he was the only one that was disciplined out of all of them, out of all the many that could have been. For some reason, just him. So, be interesting if the fact that he seems to have been picked on or scapegoated even is perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, of course, misconduct. He's been sacked.
Yeah, I guess so. It just seems odd that it's just him, though, isn't it? It just doesn't make much sense to me.
Found guilty of misconduct twice for 2 different relationships whilst he was employed undercover.
Yeah.
He was someone who he infiltrated the streets, quite a familiar face to a lot of people in that movement.
Yes. And he joined the Muslim contact unit with Lambert after SDS.
As well as infiltrating environmental groups, he also infiltrated animal rights groups. He was deployed between 95 and 2000.
We have a week's break.
We'll have to. Very good of them. I never really understand why it's quite organized like that. And then we come back with HN3, the undercover police officer, Jason Bishop, whose real name we still don't know.
No. In fact, we'll never, and as it stands, no one's going to be able to see his face when he gives testimony, so only be audio only at the hearings, as it will be on YouTube, which is really frustrating. I don't know if you recall all those years ago, the preliminary inquiries when Mitting was assessing the various undercover officers' deployments, he labelled a number of them unremarkable.
Yes, he did.
In terms of them, because they're unremarkable, we don't need to have their real names because they didn't do anything that bad. I'm sure that in terms of them being unremarkable, Emily Apple and other people would strongly disagree with that statement. But the other thing about the risk, as I recall in the preliminary hearings, is that there was no threat to life whatsoever from anybody he encountered during his deployment. So again, we'll never be told why he's been granted this extra layer of anonymity, of security, that we're not allowed to see his face as he gives evidence.
It's only a guess. I'm often given the impression that in these sorts of cases, the reason for the anonymity is because what they've gone on to do and who he is today.
Yeah.
What his job currently is, whether that's something significant within the police or in other walks of life.
Yeah, that is possible. We don't really know.
I think it's very important to say that there has been no threats to life by anybody against any of the undercover officers. That simply is not an issue. Using that phrase has been something that the lawyers representing police officers have brought up, but it's completely groundless. It's the embarrassment factor, which appears to be the bigger driver.
And if we recall with Matt Rayner, HM1 was given this same layer of anonymity that no one could see his face. But as I think it was public knowledge that it was a matter of privacy, Article 8, it wasn't like threat to life. Article 8 privacy is a derogable right, i.e. one that can be overridden by other things, which was always overridden in the case when they were actually spying on us. It's just really aggravating that they get the privacy, which we didn't, basically.
It's so discretionary, you get the impression that people of a certain weight get treated favourably by the chair on such.
But what groups Bishop was in, the one that I suppose I was most familiar with as an activist, that I wasn't based in London and was coming to the Dicey, the Arms Fair exhibition protest. He was involved, I think, all the years I was involved, and maybe another year as well. He was heavily involved with that, as well as Reclaim the Streets.
He was deployed between 1998 and 2006, so quite a long deployment, longer than most.
I remember from the Power Base profile that he was, whether this was actually turns out to be the case or not, is that he was like taken out of the field and then they wanted as many possible to go to the GA in Scotland, where he was in the minibus, which had, amongst other people, Wombles in, not the TV series, but the White Overall Libertarian. I can't remember the whole acronym now. That van, the GA, was subject to being stopped as if they were like suicide bombers or something, armed police, and taken to the police station as if it was some kind of great emergency, of course.
It was the
charge for anything in the end.
White Overalls Movement, Building Liberation, Effective Struggles.
Exactly.
So Bishop was only giving evidence for 1 day, which I think really feeds into this narrative that he's just unremarkable as far as the chair is concerned, which I think is a disgraceful position, because surely the whole idea of this process is to examine the evidence and find if there's anything of significance, not to just dismiss it as early on as he did.
Exactly.
On Tuesday, the 24th of February, we will be hearing from Don McLean. She of Small Town Girl, author, wrote a book about her experience of being deceived into a long-term relationship by Carlo Saracchi, all available from all good bookshops, probably some bad ones as well.
I will be there during that hearing. I just wish you good luck, really. I feel like when you know people quite well and they're going to give evidence, you're slightly hesitant to start editorialising on their behalf about what they may not say.
But she has spoken quite extensively about her experiences. I'll feature a link to her page on Police Spies Out of Lives. Her book is available. That tells the story of what happened. Check it out. Then on Wednesday, we have another woman who was deceived into a long-term intimate relationship by the undercover police officer, Carlo Saracchi, Lindsay, who was an activist with the Socialist Party, among other things, and deceived by Saracchi into a long-term relationship in 2001. I put a link to her story from the Police Spies Out of Lives website. Similar to what you just said about Donna, it's always difficult to editorialize about someone that you know. Lindsay is somebody who has been at hearings and followed the inquiry quite closely.
She's also in the short film We Did Not Consent, which also features Jessica.
Then we have a returning witness, Lois Austin, who gave evidence during the first phase of hearing of Tranche 3.
She needs no questions. So I just remember when she gave witness evidence before, they asked her about 2 questions, which was enough for her to fill a whole day with.
Full answers from Lois Austin during Tranche 3 phase 1. Lois Austin was a prominent member of the Socialist Party, militant tendency at the time, was spied on by a number of undercover officers, including Peter Francis, who she was questioned about last time, and also Carlo Saracchi, who I presume will be questioned about this time. And he'll be giving a full week of questioning from the 2nd to the 5th of March.
We already heard evidence about his deployment, haven't we?
Carlo Saracchi, cover name Carlo Neri, deployed undercover between 2000 and 2006 in the Socialist Party and a range of anti-fascist groups, including Youth Against Racism in Europe through to No Platform.
We actually already heard some evidence on him from other witnesses. He touched on a couple of issues, one of which was the fact that he was encouraging people to firebomb a allegedly fascist-run bookshop. And secondly, another bone of contention seems to be just how much he was involved in trade union activity. The implication from what we've heard from other witnesses that he denies that he was very much, but from their memories, from their evidence, that he was on quite a number of pickets, as well as driving people to pickets and other trade union activity.
Yeah. He deceived 3 women in intimate relationships, Lindsay and Donna, both of whom would have given evidence by the time he appears, and also one we know as Beth, who won't be giving evidence to the inquiry.
It's probably acknowledged that he went on to marry her. That's one of the things which is, I guess we'll hit. I'm not sure how much we're going to hear about that at all in the hearing.
A lot has been made about his name, because his real name, Saracchi, was revealed quite a long time before the inquiry was willing to recognize it. And they kept trying to stop us from using his real name. A really weird scenario.
It's like we knew it, but we weren't allowed to say it. And it's just ridiculous as well as unfair and stressful for those who were spied on by him, including, obviously, Donna and Lindsay.
Particularly odd because the inquiry even said that it was a short restriction order, that eventually we'd be allowed to use his name, which is now the case. And so it was unclear really what the point was of that restriction. There's a lot to be said about Carlo Saracchi. There'll be a lot more to be said once he's given evidence. Next up, on the 9th of March, we've got the start of the civilian witnesses who were spied on by Simon Wellings, starting with Guy Taylor, who was a member of Globalised Resistance.
This is the infamous phone incident that was exposed by Newsnight, or I guess that the Globalised Resistance people went to Newsnight. So basically, he managed to record a call to his handler but accidentally send it to Guy Taylor or another member of Globalised Resistance.
Yeah.
Basically, they got a full recording of his report on them to the SDS office. Now, the weird thing about what happened after that is that they did confront him, but it wasn't made public. What happened next wasn't what you would expect, i.e. for him to be withdrawn. But in fact, they redeployed him into Dissent, into the group that me and you were involved with, amongst many other people, both in the UK and across Europe, who were involved in organising opposition to the G8 meeting in Scotland, but also in Germany as well. Down. I think I was in Scotland. I think you were in both, but you were in Germany and Scotland. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
But so weirdly, Wellings, I think outside of his activity in Globalised Resistance, which there's a full profile on Powerbase, so we can put on that. Not many people remember him from the Dissent side of things. In fact, I know you said you actually vaguely recognised his face, but other than that, the only person that actually remembered him is a guy called Patrick McCurdy, who actually interviewed Wellings as part of his PhD. And there's a full separate article on his interviews with Wellings on Powerbase. Wellings, because there's no relationship involved and nobody really remembers him, I don't think he really was that personally involved with too many people. So I guess that, to some extent we can have a little bit of distance, a less emotional view of his deployment. But one of the more light-hearted things is that McCurdy was doing his Viva for his PhD. Basically, a week before that, it was revealed that the person he based his PhD on wasn't actually a real person. So he had to explain that during his PhD interview. It's quite funny, really.
Yeah.
He got his PhD, so I guess they were okay with that. It must be a pretty unique situation that... So actually, one of my sources is actually not real.
My memory of him was in Highland Dam. Him having a conversation with Michael Jacobs, the undercover officer who infiltrated kind of anarchist networks and several anarchists. Michael's having a conversation with him after the big walkouts from site, which ended in retreat. He was just chatting to him, and I was like, "Oh, who's that then?" It was, "Oh, just a guy." It was unusual for Marco to know somebody that I didn't at the time.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a Spy Cops Info podcast exclusive. I don't think that information's been shared before.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's him, just based on the photos and my memory.
I think he may be the only other person who remembers him at all then, Tom, other than Patrick, from his post-Globalised Resistance stint.
I can't talk about it, but there has been some disclosure of reporting on myself, and I believe it to be by him relating to that time.
Obviously, we can't disclose the disclosure right now, but he was around a lot more than people remembered, I think it'd be fair to say. So
something which a great many of the undercover officers managed to do, of just being fairly anonymous characters who were there to report on things, didn't make themselves particularly memorable.
I suppose that's more obvious when it becomes these more relatively recent deployments. I think when we talk about the early ones from Tranche 1 and Tranche 2, it's just like clearly it's just a long time ago, so people just didn't remember at all. But you can see there are people who were much more active in groups and memorable and made closer fake friendships with people, as well as, of course, the sexual relationships. But there were others who were more wallflower-like and who were there, but not really somehow managed to do all. Let's be clear, what they were doing in and of itself was wrong, however, but it also proves a point that they didn't need to get so deep into people's lives to do what they were doing. So that all. And I think we're going to hear probably, I imagine Boylan is going to say it was impossible, like all the others who had a relationship, sexual relationships, it was impossible to do the job without getting into these relationships. But clearly there was a number of undercovers who didn't do that. So, well.
I'm reminded of the article recently published by Diane Langford, where she talks about Sandra, who was the female undercover officer who infiltrated the Women's Liberation Front. Nobody can remember who she was, but she was clearly someone who was inside the middle of it. She says, we were this person, we were that person. It's clear that Diane Langford has attempted very extensively to try and piece together who the person that she was. Not a memorable character for whatever reason. After Guy Taylor, we've then got Chris Nyam. Chris Nyam might be known to people as one of the leaders of Stop the War Coalition. He recently got high profile arrested for the organising of the Gaza protests. He was a leading member of Globalised Resistance, a member of the Socialist Workers' Party for many years. He was spied on by Simon Wellings during that period, probably spied on by others. He's a close associate of Lindsay German, and many others like Jeremy Corbyn, who spied on. Then we've got another two activists, Noel Douglas and MT. I know Noel Douglas. He's a graphic designer, very memorable artwork, particularly relating to Globalised Resistance. I'm not sure who MT is.
As far as I can see, they're not a core participant. They're not listed as a core participant on the QCPI site, so presumably they've just volunteered a witness statement or been asked for one by the inquiry, but without being a court participant. Not sure who they are.
Patricia da Silva, the cousin of John Charles de Mendes, who was been one of the more high-profile family members to speak out as part of the campaign for justice after he was brutally murdered by Toronto police after he was supposedly mistaken for a tube bomber. 2005, killed a Brazilian man and mistakenly identified as one of the fugitives from the previous day's failed bombing attempt. Likely to be a very traumatic evidence, as is often the case with the family members of those who have been murdered by police. I recommend tuning in for that one. Thursday, the 12th of March for Patricia da Silva. And then the following week, from Monday, the 16th of March, for only 2 days, 118, Simon Wellings will be being questioned. A short one for an undercover officer, as significant as him.
There's no relationship. I don't know what evidence the civilian witnesses have given on his deployment. I think it's going to be a good idea to get into that first day on the 17th. Because I have a feeling that the Tuesday could be a short day.
It's always hard to know how the inquiry will approach it. If an undercover officer did not deceive a woman into a long-term intimate relationship, it doesn't appear like they are given a great deal of time to be questioned.
One thing generally we can say about, I think it counts for the whole of Tranche 3 hearings, is that partially because of the lack of report being copied to MI5, there's even larger amount of reports missing. It's really partial. What I've been hearing from court participants who know these officers, that there's like whole chunks, what you might think of a significant part of their deployment within particular groups or a particular year of a particular mobilization is just not there at all. The material is much more patchy in general.
The police provided a very limited disclosures to the inquiry of the reports from undercover officers. But the MI5 who had been sent, the majority of these reports, seemed to have a much more, though not entirely complete, record, which then provided the inquiry. However, in 95, was it 97, they stopped receiving, as a matter of course, all SDS deployment reports. And as such, there is much more limited reports available, though they are computerized, so they are a lot easier to read, at least.
If the inquiry actually gets around to releasing them ever.
There is a huge amount of missing disclosure as it currently stands for the next set.
Disclosure's been late. We're not talking about being published on the inquiry website, which is also massively behind, but we're talking about it being released to other court participants. Most people don't have the written statements from most of these officers still, and we're going to start on Monday. We're talking on the 29th of January. A Thursday, the inquiry starts on the 2nd of Feb. Most people who are involved in these hearings have not seen the majority of the written statements from these officers we're talking about.
There's no way to run a public inquiry. So the next witness on Wednesday, the 18th of March, is Maya, who is another woman who was deceived into a long-term intimate relationship, this time by Rob Harrison, a real name Robert Hastings, who she was in a relationship in 2006, 2007. I'll put a link to her story from the Police Spies Live's website. She's also one of the ones who was featured in the We Do Not Consent video. She's followed then on the 19th of March by Atif Chowdhury, who was an activist with the International Solidarity Movement, which was one of the group, the Palestine Solidarity Organization, that was infiltrated by Robert Hastings and was very close friends with him. Rob Hastings styled himself, like so many of them seem to, as a DJ. People have been really critical about his abilities, but he did manage to DJ at Atif Chowdhury's wedding. That's how close they were. Next up on Monday, the 23rd of March, we've got Emily Apple. Now, Emily Apple was very closely targeted by Jason Bishop. She was spied on by Robert Hastings, though she does say that she doesn't really remember him, though she lived in the same house as James Bishop. It's strange it's been put that way around. Emily Apple, a regular writer, he has written extensively about the undercover policing inquiry, as well as lots of other things. She's been involved in, she works for Campaign Against the Arms Trade, has been quite high profile, being arrested for wearing a keffiyeh not that long ago. Very long activism in the anti-arms trade movement, was very much involved with the anti-Dicey campaigns.
That's where I remember her from, and also Fitwatch,
yes,
people are from. So at the time, don't know when it really started, from the early 2000s, the police deployed forward intelligence teams, which were basically like police photographers, but they weren't taking the photos covertly. In fact, they were more like paparazzi and harassing people, and they weren't just taking photographs, they were calling out people's names as they're going in and out of meetings, which led to people actually masking up just to go to a meeting, which became something I really remember becoming quite stressful just to go to a meeting because you're getting harassed by these state-run paparazzi. Emily and other people set up a fit watch and they counterfeit, so they held up sort of banners obscuring the cameras and stuff like that, and basically got in their faces as they were getting in ours. Yes. The other thing about Emily was that she was heavily targeted by Martin Hogbin, who targeted against the arms trade. He was employed by British Aerospace, BAE Systems. You may have seen Mark Thomas, who was also close to Martin, the comedian, talk about his relationship with Martin Hogbin. So that was at the same time that Bishop was around, that he was to provide.
Yeah. And then the rest of that week, Tuesday the 24th through till Thursday the 26th, we have Robert Hastings himself, HN18 Rob Harrison, deployed between 2004 and 2007, which makes him the most recent undercover police officer to be questioned at the inquiry. He infiltrated the International Solidarity Movement, as well as loads of other campaign groups, State of Emergency Collective, Global Resistance. He was part of the Ramparts, a social sense. No Borders. I did a lot of benefit gigs
with Rob Harrison and Wellings and Bishop, the three undercovers to date, the stuff I'm involved with most. I probably went to Rampart more than any other social centre in London. I wasn't based in London, but I went there quite a lot. I remember going there after the G20 and plenty of other occasions staying there, as well as maybe even recording. I can't remember. I definitely went to quite a few gigs there. One of the main social centres in London. It's a great space.
Post book fair after parties there, I seem to remember.
I definitely remember being there at the early hours in the morning after a book fair, for sure. Rob Harrison, State Borders, by being yourself were involved with that group in South Wales and Bristol more than in London. But he was also at Gatwick State Borders camp, which we were at.
Yeah.
And one of the other things about his deployment, he was the last arrest of an SDS officer, which was, it appears, one of the catalysts. There's never one reason for any of these things. It's complicated, but definitely his arrest at Dicey, I think it was at 2007, at Dicey, was one of the reasons why the shit hit the fan in terms of the SDS ending. Or we've heard there's the closing down report, which we've already.
Episode 43, shoddy and thoroughly dishonest, the SDS closing report, where we go into the detail. The SDS being closed down, we're checking out.
Definitely, his deployment was significant. I know we are coming to the end of the SDS, and Rob Harrison was the penultimate deployment. The one who lasted beyond that was Dave Jones, HN66, who we won't be hearing evidence from.
There are a huge number of undercover officers who are not being called, and that has been the case since the very beginning of the inquiry process. But it's particularly egregious, I think, when we come to events that are only 20 years ago, but were less than 10 years from when the inquiry was first called. And I'm sure it's the cause for amount of relief amongst officers who were probably serving when the inquiry was called, that they've managed to sidestep being dragged in to account for what they did. That is all the witnesses for Tranche 3 Phase 2 of the inquiry. There will be a Tranche 3 Phase 3, which will focus on the managers and support staff, which will be in June, July. But as it stands, this will be the end of Special Demonstration Squad officers who have been called by the inquiry. It has only been a fraction, which I think is a disgrace, but it does give us a glimpse. So if you haven't registered, it is still possible to attend. Now, I haven't heard anybody who hasn't registered, who hasn't been able to attend every hearing, even the most popular hearings. There's still plenty of space in the public gallery. So if you are considering coming along, don't be put off by the fact you haven't registered.
Definitely. Tom will be there as usual every day. I'm going to make a couple of appearances. Please do come along to the hearings. It'd be great to see people.
Well, as I said, there will be more hearings in June and July, but then there's going to be a break, and we don't know how long it's going to be because of the retirement of the chair and the need to appoint a new chair, from which there's been no further movement on who the new chair is going to be. So that's going to take a while. There will be an interim report from the current chair, which is due to come out in 2027 at some point, which will look at the implement of the SDS.
Have they sounded out you about taking on the role of the chair?
Not as of yet. They have my number. How about
you? Me? I don't think so, no.
Thanks for joining us. If you're not familiar with the podcast, you can check out all the previous episodes and information about anything to do with the undercover police at spycops.info, which was relaunched not that long ago and is much more pleasant to look at than it used to be. You can find links on there to all the other campaign groups and also to the spycopsresearch.info website, which is the comprehensive undercover research group resource on the SDS and the National Public Order Intelligence Unit.
We're putting new articles on it every week. We've got 500 articles on there now. We're still a work in progress. We're obviously slightly dogged by the fact that the inquiry still haven't finished disclosing Tranche 2. We're going to have to work around that now. We can't just wait forever for them to sort that out. As well as all the evidential-based articles, we have 150 articles on how the inquiry works, with quick explainers for people who are involved in this inquiry. There's like 20 other public inquiries at the moment in the UK called under the Inquiries Act 2005. So I think it's a good resource for people involved in other public inquiries. The Orgreave inquiry was announced in the summer. I've still not heard exactly when that's going to start.
Probably about 5 years' time, knowing how these things generally run.
But yeah, we'll see when that starts. That'd be a really interesting inquiry.
Please check out previous episodes of the podcast. If you're able to give us a 5-star review on your preferred podcasting platform, we would very much appreciate it. If you're up for giving us a nice little write-up as well, please tell your friends, please share this link, and we'll see you all next time.